Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then, you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I feel like I've been having a lot more connection with my listeners through the Q&As and polls. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Hey guys, welcome back to Season 3, A Catholic's Perspective, the podcast about being a young Catholic surviving in a secular world. Today I have Alexandria with me. Welcome. Thank you so much for being on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. So currently, we are on the road. We just got back from Louisville, Kentucky, so that's why the audio might be a little weird in this episode of the podcast. But I just got back from Matt Frad's podcast, and so it's been a really long couple days. So we're on the road. So please have patience with all the audio things. We really appreciate your guys' patience as you listen to this podcast. But Alex, why don't you give the listeners a little bit of background about you and what you like to do? Anything you feel comfortable sharing?
Oh, yeah, awesome. No, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me on. I am a wife and a mom. I am 34 years old, and I'm pregnant with my fifth son right now, who's due like the week of Christmas, which is so exciting. So I have a 9-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old baby boy. And I've been married. Actually, we're actually going out tonight. I actually just got my makeup done for I usually don't do that, but we're actually going out tonight for our 11-year anniversary. So I've been kind of a mom and a wife. Yeah. So I'm kind of been a mom and a wife for, just a little over a decade. And I met my husband, Nick. Actually, I think I was about your age, Amber. I was 22 and he was 24, and I actually met him on Catholic Match. And so we were both cradle Catholics and really, into our faith and things. And that was kind of our priority with meeting and dating. And so I love telling that story too. Kind of like at the end of dating my college years, I just really realized that was like my main priority in a relationship, specifically in looking for marriage, was that I just really wanted a man who shared my faith and would lead me in the faith and all these things. And so online dating definitely wasn't as big as it was back then, but I heard a couple stories about this Catholic Match site. And so I went on, and things happened pretty quick. I met Nick, and so it's kind of a fun story that way. But we ended up dating pretty fast and got married like within a year, and then started our family. And so that's kind of my personal background. And then I am trained as a registered nurse and a family nurse practitioner, and also ended up getting some training in fertility awareness, NAPRO technology, really passionate. The faith has just always been the most important thing to me. And so I've always been Catholic, and I've always kind of been pro-life. I've always been really passionate about those topics. And so in my education, I was really focused on not prescribing the birth control pill, and really looking for good alternatives for women in the pro-life movement. So that was kind of a big deal to me too, through our marriage. And then as we've added kids, and as we've just started homeschooling and all of these other things, I have put my career kind of on hold and stepped back from that, and really stepped into the role of being a stay-at-home mom in the past couple of years. And that is when I started to create a blog online. And then in 2020, when I had my fourth son, that was when I decided to join Instagram, and have just really found a lot of joy in connecting with moms there. And so right now I'm a stay-at-home homeschooling mom, about to have my fifth son, and doing a lot of work on the internet and social media, and connecting with moms there. And so that's pretty much where I am.
That's amazing. God bless you.
Thank you. Oh, Amber, you're cutting out. Go ahead, say it again.
Oh, I'm sorry. there's so many people that aspire to do the exact same thing, to have a family young, and it's just such a beautiful thing to experience. I know you said you worked in like the NAFRO technology and everything like that. That's fantastic. We need more of that. And I think that's becoming a lot more popular nowadays as we really start coming back around and respecting life a lot more since Roe v. Wade has been overturned. So I guess in the beginning, like, I know you said you guys met on Catholic Match, but before that, how did you know that you were called to be a mother, a wife, and a mom? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I love that. So I was raised as a cradle Catholic. I was actually the oldest of 8 kids. So just from a big pro-life family. And so growing up, I would say my mom was definitely my biggest role model. And she was also a nurse who then ended up staying home to raise us. And honestly, I really, my parents worked really hard to just give us a really enjoyable, like fruitful childhood. And so I just was raised in a really great family. Of course, no family's perfect, but I just saw their witness to marriage. And my mom just really always inspired me. She really worked hard to try to show us like a joyful marriage. I always saw my parents going on dates. And my sisters and I would babysit a lot, our little brothers. And yeah, I just really always saw my parents trying, even though we had this big family, really trying to prioritize each other. And so I think just from a really young age, I remember being in kindergarten and writing on like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I just wrote, I want to be a nurse and a mom, basically like my mom. So I just kind of always, especially I think being the oldest and the firstborn, had that natural instinct of like caring for the rest of my family. And so I just kind of always had that desire, mostly from the example of my mom. And they went through, I think through their 30s, they went through like, their own kind of reconversion back into the faith. And I remember that. So I remember them, trying to make an effort of like praying the rosary in the car and doing things like that. And I think I just always wanted to have my own baby dolls and just wanted to be a mom, like I said, because I had that good example. And I did go through a period before I met Nick, for sure, where I definitely would slightly discern religious life. And I remember like sometimes going on a retreat and like wondering about that. But I really always just wanted to be a wife and a mom. And that was just kind of something that I just was hoping was in my future, and just kind of had a faith that, yeah, that's what God was calling me to.
No, yeah, that's so beautiful. And I think so many people can definitely relate to that, because I think their parents had a great impact on what they eventually wanted to do. And having that great example of your parents definitely helps to discern the area. And I know you said you met, what was your husband's name again?
Nick.
Nick, I know you said you met him on Catholic Match. I know there's so many people, and online dating in general just gets a bad rap these days. How did you feel being on the Catholic dating match site, and at what point did you decide to do that? Was it because there were no guys in your area, or was it just kind of I'll just try this out?
Yeah, no, I love that question. It's so funny. I'm actually shocked to hear you say that it gets a bad rap. I guess that's a really interesting to hear. Because I would love to hear, like, I think we're a little split generations of like because from my perspective, I feel like that's so many people I'm finding that's like where they have met their spouse was online. But I think maybe a lot of younger people are they're getting like turning away from that. So I'd be interested to hear what you think about that. I have a lot of younger siblings, younger brothers, and I think they feel that too, where they're like, maybe it's getting a bad rap and it's becoming too much of like a hookup culture versus like a relationship. But anyway, that's just interesting. So for me back then, like 11 years ago, it was almost unheard of. Like I didn't know, I rarely knew anybody who got married and that had met online. And so the Easter of my senior year, also, Amber, I'll say that. So because I said my mom was kind of my role model, and I really wanted to like replicate her life. She always loved getting married young. And so I kind of wanted to get married young. Like she'd always say, me and Dad got married, we were 22, 23, and I always, in my head, I was like, I had a job lined up as a nurse, and I was pretty, I felt like I was ready and for a steady relationship. And I felt like I desired marriage at a young age because of that. And so anyway, when I started seriously thinking about that, like you said, it was really just the point where the guys that I would date, the faith was always secondary, or kind of like a joke a little bit, like, oh, you're so sweet that you want to take me to church, or oh, it was never like I'm on the same level as you, or I want to lead you in the faith. And the more and more I prayed about it, I realized that was what I wanted in a man. Number one, like of everything in my checklist, like desired a man who was strong in the faith, and that was my strong desire. So this Easter of my senior year, I was home for break, and my mom was in a prayer group, and she just had kind of said, matter of fact, like nonchalant, there was this young couple, and they were talking about this, how they met on Catholic Match, and they say the rosary together, and they go to adoration. She was like, it was just interesting, and she did not say that in any way to like tell me to do that. She was just sharing a story, and that planted a seed in my head, and I was like, what is this Catholic Match? Because that was the relationship I desired. So I went back literally that spring telling my best girlfriends, and they were like, what? Like, it was they were not on that radar at all. And so I was in the library one night studying for finals, and it was me and my best friend, and I said, I'm gonna go on this. I was like, I just want to meet my husband was what it came down to. I was like, I just really want to meet this husband. And I was like, man, we're going to graduate in a couple months, and there's just, I'm going to try this. And she was also very Catholic. We would go to mass together on campus. And so thankfully it was her that was with me, and she actually encouraged me. She was like, yeah, you should try it. Go ahead. This is interesting. So I put in my credit card. I remember it was like, you had to pay like $17 or something to start this profile. And that night I put in my credit card, signed it up, and typed in my information. And that night, Nick's profile was one of the first ones that had popped up because of geographically matching areas. And so I saw his profile picture, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's so handsome, and said he's from a big family, and he loves basketball, and he loves dancing, and he loves Mary. And it was just like, I felt like I was reading his profile, and I was like, it sounds amazing. And I'm the very like sanguine extrovert. So I was like, I'm going to message him. So I sent him this like long message. You just seems like such an amazing man. I would love to meet you. Like this, I think we actually have it saved. It's really funny. And I sent him this long message, and then it must have been, I think maybe a couple days, I think it was just a couple days. He had been on Catholic Match for like 6 months or so, and he was actually about to end his subscription. And he said he was at a Phillies game, and he saw this email, and he like saw my profile picture, and he was like with his sister, and he's like, oh my gosh, I need to message this girl back. And he messaged me back. Yeah. And he messaged me back, and we set up a time to chat, and we actually have our first chat saved, and we have it like printed in a book because it's so funny. And I tell people this, like, I felt like through the screen that I was like falling in love with this guy on our first chat. Like, I remember sitting there in the college library, like laughing out loud, and like, just, it was so funny how God can use technology. And I just felt like, oh my gosh, things he was saying, and we have, like I said, we have it saved. It's just really funny to go back and read it. But so since that first chat, he was very respectful, and he said, let's take this offline. I want to meet you in person. So before I graduated, he drove down. It was like 2 weeks later. He drove down to my campus and came to meet me. And all my girlfriends were around, and they were like, we have to be near you. There's this like guy who's coming to the campus. It was like kind of creepy. Like, we don't know who this is going to be. And he showed up, and we met him actually in the chapel. So we had like our first date started with like a mass, and my girlfriends were like, staring him down. And then we went out to dinner, and like I said, kind of progressed from there. But yeah, so that's kind of how the decision process went. It was fairly quick, but I was thankful to have my one friend's support, and that seed planted.
Right. No, that's such a sweet story too, because I think it's a refreshing story as well, because so many of us hear about all the horror stories that happen, on social dating apps and everything. And it's just really sweet, and almost, it's actually almost helpful to hear that you can find your significant other that way,
Yes.
Like, that is an
yes.
option.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so interesting because my husband now, one of the things, like he actually has his own company where he actually films weddings, and he's a wedding videographer. And So and I'm always so interested in the couples he's filming, like, where do they meet? You know, what are they like? And there's such a high percentage who meet online. And I do think there's a lot of successful stories, from that. So yeah, I'm sure there's the opposite too, but I do think that there are, good stories. I definitely encourage people. I'm like, give it a try on Catholic Match. It works for me.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think that's reassuring to a lot of people who maybe were hesitant about trying Catholic Match, that maybe they'll give it a shot. Who knows? You know, it's a great way to meet people. What were some fears that you had to overcome, like when you decided you were going to marry Nick? Whether that was with motherhood or just in general, getting married, like what were some of the fears that you had to overcome there and to do that?
Yeah, I think the fears of I did not have really that many fears of marrying Nick. I would say I had some of the normal, like, wow, this is really getting serious, and like the normal, like, early dating doubts where you're like, oh my gosh, like you kind of, there's a realization that this man really is the one. And when you're going through that process, there can definitely be some fears where, you're just like, wow, this really is happening. And there's an acceptance that has to occur. But that wasn't so hard for me because God really blessed that in the beginning. And when I did have fears, I remember one time I was like thinking, oh, I'm going to go back to this other ex-boyfriend, and, voicing that to Nick, or like saying, I love you so fast. And he just was always such a voice of reason. And to me, and we just really complement each other well. I really fell in love with him quickly. And so I didn't really have a lot of fears of marrying him. I was pretty, it was pretty good in that way. But I would say that my biggest struggles was definitely through motherhood, and just having fears of, like, how's my identity changing? And the career thing was a huge thing for me, and still is, and it's something I like to process and share with moms online, because I know how prevalent that is in the messages that we get as women, through motherhood. And so I think a lot of the fears for me were more so with motherhood, and rippled into marriage maybe a little bit, where I didn't know subconsciously even that it was almost like there was like a competition within marriage, once we grew our family, of like, well, we have to be equally working the same amount of time, and my value of working in the home doesn't equal your value of working out the home. And a lot of those roles within a modern marriage, there was a lot of fears about that, especially because, like I told you, I was very passionate about my education. And that was really, and it still is very important to me. I love the healthcare field. I love medicine, being a nurse. And there was a lot of fears around stepping back from that and raising my family, that I've definitely overcome them at this point, and I can confidently speak to them, because I feel like there's a lot of lies that I didn't realize I had fallen for, and that I think are just, very common. That's what's sold to women these days. So I think my fears mostly went around that, but thankfully, not really ever with marrying Nick, thank goodness.
No, for sure. I know that can be scary for some people. I think a lot of people can get cold feet on their wedding day because some people second guess their ideas, or I don't really know the exact reason. I've never been married, but I definitely
Right.
know that there can be fear involved in marriage. And so it's wonderful to hear that you actually had no doubts about that. I mean, we all going to have some worries, but not having that main fear is very helpful. And now you are, obviously you're a mother. You have 5 beautiful boys. The 5th one is still cooking.
Yeah.
We love it. So
Yeah.
how are you implementing Catholicism into your kids' lives so that when they grow up, they'll hopefully continue practicing it?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly. Totally. And I will say too, like, back to the, to expand on just the marriage question, that, I do think, that before that happens to you, like you said, it's hard to understand, but I do think that, it's good to, tell people that there's the hope, and like God really does give you a good peace, when you're meant to be with this man, there is a peace, and a really just holy acceptance, especially when you're both getting married in the Catholic Church. And I think there's a lot of sacramental grace that is just a supernatural thing we can't really explain, So that's just a good, hopeful thing to hear, that I wanted to say, but not that it was, it's definitely not on me. It's just, God blessing those things. But yes, but in terms of prioritizing the faith, I mean,
Absolutely.
especially since that was the foundation of Nick and I's relationship from day one, like literally from us meeting on a religious site, like, we both knew from the very beginning, like this was our priority in our relationship and therefore our kids. And so it's so fun to get these questions and answer them, Amber, because it comes so instinctively to us, that a lot of times we're not even like talking out loud about these decisions because it's just such a priority to us, to have a crucifix in every room, to of course get them baptized as soon as they can, talk about the sacraments, like establish a family prayer life, pray over them, take them to mass every Sunday, take them to confession, have them see us take us going to confession, like the sacraments. And my husband's also an artist, and so displaying Catholic art in our home. We both just love the Catholic faith. So, I mean, we'll like, we did Bible timeline studies together as a married couple, and we'll have our kids do that. We'll show them religious shows. Like these things come very natural to us. And when we articulate that, like, this is why we do this, it's really fun and helpful to say, like, these are things that we love doing, and that these are ways that we're raising our kids in the faith. And to be honest, like whenever we talk about any decision in parenting, that's our number one priority, is like, well, how is this going to affect, like, even when we talk about like, doing travel sports, our oldest son is getting older, and we're talking about, sports and travel sports. And we realize how that decision, like, well, wait, we don't want to be gone on Sundays. We want to keep Sunday holy. And that affected that decision, of what are we really prioritizing? And then with education, like when we decided to homeschool, the whole reason was really, so how can we pass on the faith to our kids in the best way? And I had to struggle with that too, because I can become very tempted into like worldly things, just as a woman in general and those kind of things. But I had to realize, like, it wasn't about, popularity in school or something like that. It was really about, forming my kids, especially for boys, like forming them in virtue and faith. So, so all of those things, I think, what I would just say is like, it just, as long as you have your priorities in place, like the things tend to come naturally. Do you know what I mean? Like the decisions start coming naturally once that's your first priority. So like when you're decorating a house, well, if our first priority is for everything in our house to reflect God's beauty and show God's beauty, it's like, well, that's our first priority. When we're decorating the nurseries, it's like, where's the crucifix? Like that's the number one thing, or, we're planning for the birth. It's like, okay, who's going to be the godparents? Like those are our first thoughts, are always directed at the faith. And when you have that lens, it does bring a lot of peace, and it does take a lot of pressure off too, because there's so much pressure on parents to, figure these things out. And it's like, well, when you're turning to God, it's like, okay, he's the ultimate, he's going to help us in these decisions. And we're not going to be perfect parents. We are going to mess up all the time. And we always do. And we're learning so much. I mean, we don't have teenagers yet. We don't know what's coming, but we do know where we want to have our boys turn to. And we work really hard to try to make that, a priority.
Right. No, absolutely. And that's beautiful. I mean, I know we're all susceptible to the worldly things. I know I am. I know most of my friends are. It's just part of being human. And I think it's interesting, how we really can have an effect on our kids, the way that we approach Catholicism and the way that we teach it to them, how one way might lead them away from the faith, but how you guys are doing it will stick with them up until adulthood and even further. And so it's always interesting to me whenever I hear how people implement the faith into their children's lives, because it's such a beautiful thing, and the kids recognize that. And I know a lot of kids appreciate it when they become older. I guess my next question is, what tips do you have for women who want to be mothers but are afraid of what the world tells them about it? Because you definitely went through that when you decided to be a stay-at-home mom and homeschool. So tell me a bit about that.
Yes, like what you would say. Yes. And also I was just thinking, just to back up your other question quickly, is that I do think, of course, like there's no way to control our kids if they're going to stay in the faith and not. And, you can do
Right.
everything quote unquote right, where you can do all these sacramental things, have this sacramental home and homeschool them Catholic, and you can do all these things. And, you can't control obviously what's going to happen to them. And I think, and of course my family's still young, so I haven't experienced this, but I hear from other parents, and I try to always remember that, that's the whole thing of free will, and that's the whole thing of, them making their own choices. And that one of the most important things that I didn't mention earlier was just, and something that my blog is named after the word joy. And so, that's something I have to constantly remember is, because Catholicism, a lot of times, this can be very turned off by people from rules and rituals and doing these things and following these specific ways, when, we're not always as charismatic as other Christian faiths. And so my point is that I think I've heard a lot of advice too, and I try to do this where, having them see the joy that Nick and I get from our faith, and that, when we're authentically living it, and that is also like our biggest attempt, and like our biggest tip of like with
Absolutely.
raising the kids in the faith. So more than, all these other like praying the rosary or homeschooling Catholic or any of these things, it's really that's the most important is, them seeing us not be quiet in the pew at church, but like loving, like just finding joy and going to receive the Eucharist. And so that's something I wanted to say too, because I think that can often be misled or misinterpreted, I think, in Catholicism. And
Right.
and I think that it's something that we have to work toward as a church. But anyway, so yes. And so back to your second question, where you said what you would tell women who are aspiring to be moms but are maybe scared of motherhood a little bit or unsure. Is that what you were saying, right?
Yeah, it's basically
A little
like,
bit like
and I love
unsure.
what you said about and I love what you said about loving your faith. Because the
Yeah.
kids will see that too, but yeah, it's basically just like mothers, or women who want to be moms, but they're afraid
Yeah.
because the world tells them all these horror stories about
Yes.
all these crazy things. I know
Oh,
you have experience with that too.
yes. And it's so funny, Amber, because I talk about this all the time where I say that we can't help. I mean, it's like St. Paul says, we're not of the world, but we're in the world. And, especially if you go to college now, I mean, you cannot, it's infiltrated in education, this whole idea of, women specifically, putting, I mean, so many other things, but just, for women, the whole idea is, you're not taught to be a wife and a mom. You're not brought up to be a wife and a mom. You're raised and you're taught in the education system, to focus on your career and to have a career and like aspire to it. And it's just that's our culture. I mean, any magazine, any media, any education, any of it. And so even somebody like me who was very creative path, like I wanted to get married young, I saved myself for marriage. Like even someone like me who did all of these things, I still was so formed by the culture, and couldn't recognize it. And like looking back, I wish somebody would have kind of called out those lies and been like, this is not true. Like you don't need to have what the world is telling you as a woman to prove yourself as a woman, Alex. You don't need to have this high achieving quote unquote career. Like motherhood is a career. Motherhood is your vocation. It's the most beautiful thing you can do. And another big lie is that you have to choose between the two and that you're giving something up. And that is such a lie. It's just a blatant lie because, every baby, every time you give birth, every time you give life, God is fulfilling your dream, and he's not wasting. I mean, it's pathetic for me to even say out loud. And that the fact that I even thought this for multiple years was that, I am wasting my education by raising my kids. And it's such a lie because what does that mean, you're wasting? I mean, your role as a mother is irreplaceable. You are the only woman who can birth this baby, who can love this baby, who can pour your heart into them, can teach them, can raise them in heaven. I mean, anyone else can run a YouTube channel. Anyone else can be a nurse. Anyone else, like every other job. And of course there's God calls you into your vocations through other ways. But my point is that these other things, tangible things, can be replaceable. And the legacy of a mother and giving life, like that is irreplaceable. And you are never wasting anything. And I think that it's such a lie. The other lie is that you really have to choose, like I said. And, men, you can give facts and saying like, well, if you have children, you have to be out of the workforce this amount of time. Therefore, you might not make as much money, or you might not be able to get ahead in your career because you have to take time off for the pregnancy and the postpartum and those kind of things. But when you actually look at the reality of it, it's just not true. And like it's just, there's so much to say with that, but like the children will never take away from fulfilling your dreams, even through a career or even through, because, the key of any career is relationships. And so as a mother, it's like a foundational relationship, this baby that you're giving birth to. And so if anything, and you can talk to women who are very quote unquote successful in careers, and they, the ones who are, especially Christian and just having so much joy, they will go back and tell you like how their child inspired them and how they're giving birth, like how it, reinvigorated their dreams. And, not to say that it's easy, but anything good is not going to be easy. Right. So,
Absolutely.
so being a mother, so I would say it's a long conversation, but depending on who I'm talking to, I would say like, let's really talk through what is your specific fear? Because I know for me, that was a specific fear, was that I was going to be wasting something and not using the education that I had worked so hard for. And then I would walk through the woman and specifically, coach her through how that is a lie and how that's not true, and break it down. So I think there's a lot of temptations on women of why they're scared of motherhood. Some of it could be image, their body image, and there's a lot of lies around that too. So whatever it is that you're fearful, like you can walk through and you can call it out, and you can name what is this lie that we're going through, and then you can talk about it, because it motherhood is truly, it's just truly amazing. It really is. And like I said, it's not easy. I'm not saying it's like so easy, but what's good that is easy, right?
No, it's so true. And I especially love that, you can literally, no part of your life is going to be easy. It just depends on the way that you handle it, really. And
Yes.
if God gives you this child to raise, he's entrusting you with such a beautiful gift. And that's really a duty. One of the biggest duties is to create people for society, to turn society around. And we do that by homeschooling and, and by giving them a faith and know that they are loved by God. And it's just such a beautiful thing. And you're obviously so involved in your children's lives with homeschooling and everything, but how important is it for the dads to be involved in their kids' faith life? How does that really impact the children?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, Amber, like it's so important what you do in family life, because like the heart of any society is a family. That's the cell of any, the family. And like, what's the heart of a family is a mother. So it's so important. And the culture tries to teach us the opposite of that and tries to tell us, like with mothers, that we need to be more like a father in terms of like get out of the home and, role reversal, all of these different things. And so, and not to say there's so many things that can happen in a modern marriage that are good, but the whole idea that the culture is really kind of anti-family is just a true reality. And so there's different temptations with dads, of course, like, to not prioritize a family, you talk about at a young age, like absolutely that a man, men need to really delay things, and they need to do things a lot later. And so that's a disservice to fathers. I mean, in terms of the fathers being important, oh my gosh, I mean, marriage, and I was just writing about this and talking about this, how marriage and family life, like it is such a team, and the Catholic Church is like the best place of going through these teachings, because the Catholic Church always talks about this, how it's men and women are complementarity, and we're not competitive with each other, we complement each other, right? Like theology of the body, I know you're aware of that, right? And like all the beautiful truths in theology of the body, and how we complement each other. And so for a child, like that, for the ultimate growth of the child with their faith and with everything, is they really take so much from the mom and the dad, and they're different, they're not the same, they're so different, they need both of those. And specifically for boys, I mean, the fathers are, of course, they're just so important. I mean, so important. And like I said, it's not like, oh, a mother is more important than a father. No, they're both equally important to the child's development. And they're just very different. They're just very different in their roles. And so, yeah, I think especially with boys, with fathers. You know, there's a lot of the whole toxic masculinity. There's a lot of like lies that are fed to young boys these days. And so a lot of fatherless boys, I think, and just a lot of lies on masculinity. So for them to have a dad who is faithful is just so important. I remember one of the books I was reading about parenting Catholic kids or parenting, keeping kids in the faith. One statistic was talking about, and this is, I think, a very big study, but it was just talking about how like the mom can do everything. Like she can pray the rosary, she can do all these things. And the dad can like, basically for a son, like the dad can only be, maybe they see him like once a week or something. But the vision of their father leading them in the faith is like so much more powerful than seeing their mother doing all these things, only because like they're a boy too. They identify with the father, you know. Does that make sense? And it was just
Yeah.
funny when I remember reading that, because it was almost like I said, there's not a competition. They're equally as important, but it was just really funny where it was like, oh man, but it just goes to show, you know, boys, the boys want to become men. They don't want to be their mom. They want to be their father. That's who, you know, that's how they're created. And so, you know, for them to see a witness of a dad's faith is extremely powerful, extremely important. When you look at the statistics of, you know, kids who have a father who's in the faith, you know, it's a very high success of them staying faithful because of the leadership, you know, the headship and the leadership of their dad's faith. But they're both equal. They're both equally important, and you, like I said, you need them both, and that's why I love the Catholic Church's teachings on marriage and family, because it's always about that. It's always stressing, you know, the complementarity of the man and woman and the effect of that on the kid.
Right. And it's such a beautiful thing too, especially in a world that likes to warp everything and kind of pit the genders against each other. It's just so disheartening to always see the dad as the butt of the joke in like all these TV comedies and everything. Like he's such an idiot.
Yes.
It's so annoying. And I can't even find a good show anymore besides maybe Little House on the Prairie, where the dad is like an upstanding good man. And it's just so heartbreaking. And you're right about those statistics. 70% of kids whose only mom goes to church fall away from the church. So if the dad, if the dad is not involved, only 30, I can't do math. Yeah, and only 30 or 40% of kids actually stick with their faith. But if the dad goes, like so many more kids stick with their faith. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore, though. You know, there's so many guys out there who are just you know, they've fallen into the trap of the world, and they've fallen into these lies of hookup culture, and nobody wants to work anymore. It's really hard to find men who want to protect and provide, not just physically, but also spiritually. It can be a real struggle for some women to really trust the men that they're going to marry to lead them. And so that's why it's so important to definitely have confidence in the man you're going to marry and to date, and to trust in the Lord to lead you in the right direction in that area. And I'm definitely a daddy's girl. So anything my dad did, I did. I always wanted to be around him, always wanted to do what he was doing. And I love my mom, and I hung out with my mom a lot. You know, she homeschooled us and she taught us a lot of great skills. But I noticed whenever my dad did something, I instantly I wanted to be there with him. I wanted to do that with him. And for girls to have such a good connection with their father is so important as well, because when they start to date, when they start to get into that world, if their dad is not a stand-up person, if they have problems with their father, those problems will come out later in their relationships. And so to have a good relationship with your father is also very important, even as an adult. But I absolutely love that so much. That's really good.
Oh, I love what you're saying. It's so true. It's so true. And I remember, like, as the oldest, my dad was an early riser, and I was too, and he would go to mass in the morning at 6 a.m. And I remember being so excited to wake up and go with him. And my mom would be sleeping in with the babies in the bed, and there's, of course, that's great, but you're right that for girls too, absolutely. You're so right. And how that plays out, and specifically with the type of man that they then aspire to. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I guess the last couple questions I have for you, what are your favorite parts about being a mom? What are like the best parts that you never thought about, but are now your favorite parts now that you're a mother?
Oh my gosh, it's so many. I love it. It's so there's so many. It's just so good. Oh my gosh, there's so I mean, oh gosh, okay, let me think. Some of the best parts. Um, I think like okay, there's so many good parts. I mean, I think another best part is just like the experience of you being their mom. And it's weird because sometimes like our oldest son just became an altar server last week, and I was
Oh,
like,
that's so
oh my
sweet.
gosh, I it was the sweetest thing. I was like crying so much. I couldn't believe it. And I'm just sitting here thinking like, how did I birth this kid who's now like, growing up, but like I mean he's not, he's still 9, but I'm just like, this is so crazy. And so I think one of the greatest joys, like that's so unexpected, is just seeing them, like just seeing those things happen, like the little things that they then accomplish. Like a lot of motherhood, I like to use a sports analogy, is like, you're sitting on the sidelines, like you are forming them and then you're watching them, like you're watching their life unfold. And that is such a joy. Of course, like through the bad things too, because they hopefully can turn to you and you can be like a source of hope for them. But it really is a joy to just watch them become like who God created them to be. And especially having multiple kids, there can be always a temptation of like comparing them, and what is this, especially to the oldest, like what is this one like, and it's such a joy when you can witness their differences and just be like, wow, this is really how God, this is nothing I did. Like God, it's not because I read them this certain book and I gave them a certain thing. Like, my boys now, one of them will just naturally run up and ask me, can I have more paper and more pens? Because he's
Right.
just naturally gifted in drawing. And one will run up and say, can I, can you buy me more, balls, because he's just naturally gifted in that. Or, the one will just sit there and say, I just finished these books. Can you buy, like, and it's nothing, it's just their innate temperament, their innate, just like discovering who you are. And so I think that's a joy as a mom, is to really witness those things and just witness that these are God, people that God created. And it's really fascinating. I think I love it
That's
as a nurse
wonderful.
because I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like a study on human. You're like, this is so and of course, like people say the cliche stuff, but the cliche stuff, I think, because as my kids are getting older, I'm just appreciating it so much. Like when they're little, and like my toddler now, like he doesn't like want me to put him down, like when there's other people around. And that is something that is such a joy, because they really want you and they only want you. Like you are their mom,
Mhm.
and it's such a joy because you just realize that. And I think when you only have little kids, it can be, you're still figuring it out. And so you're like, oh my gosh, this is like, this is so much. Like, are they ever gonna like, are they like, are they ever gonna, they're so needy, or what's gonna, and then, and then all of a sudden, they're waving goodbye and stuff like that. And you're like, you realize that that's a very short-lived time. Their childhood is very short. And, that role that you play is just so important. So, and it's just funny too. Like, there's just so many things I love about a mom, about being funny. Like, they'll write little notes like, mom, I'm sorry I lied to you, like I'll give you my Kit Kat,
Aw,
or just like something really funny, like,
I
or
definitely
like
remember
they'll,
doing that as a child. I definitely did that to my
yeah,
mom.
yeah. And they're like, the one like taped a quarter to an index card and was like, mom, I'll pay you my whole quarter. Like, can I just play more video games and I'll give you my quarter? Like, it's just like funny stuff that they do. So one of the things that I found joy in, that I talk a lot about on Instagram and things, is keeping this motherhood journal. And that's been a real joy for me, of writing out those memories. And so I have them. So I try to encourage moms, to do that for themselves, like little keepsakes. And that helps you to recognize the joy, because, of course, like anything, motherhood can be extremely overwhelming. It can be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. There's no graduate school for motherhood, there's no,
Right.
so in parenting and family life, relationships, you're figuring these things out. But God gave us all this wisdom, and he gave us community. And so there's things that you do figure out in the struggles. And then I think, in the suffering parts of motherhood, like when you're really suffering and struggling, that, then it's thank God for your faith, because otherwise, it's just so hard to deal with anything in life, really. But I think, to have teaching that to our kids of, I don't have all the answers and I'm never going to be perfect, but you know what, like Jesus is, and our church does have the answers. And so go there, and that can help us to find joy, like even in those hard times.
Right. No, absolutely. And what a beautiful story, just in general. I want to thank you for coming on, because that was so incredible. I know that must have helped so many people. And, it's just incredible to see how children grow and how your life really develops as a parent, and how it changes in such beautiful ways. And, when we lean on God, we truly are leaning on our Savior, and He's the one that will lead the children. And it's just such a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about this.
Oh my gosh. Thanks so much, Amber. Yeah. Keep up what you're doing. It's so great to have, good voices out there, and just sharing your faith in general is such a bold thing to do these days. So
thank you. And where can my listeners find you? Where can my listeners find you, Alex?
Yes. So I'm primarily, Instagram is my main social media form right now. And my handle is just my name. So it's at Alexandria DeRose. And then my website, I'm continually updating, but my website platform is at joymamablog.com.
What a wonderful thing. I love that so much. So guys, definitely go check out her blog. And thank you so much, Alex, again for being on here. It was a pleasure to meet you and listen to your story.
Yes. Thank you so much, Amber. Thanks for having me on, and good job with all that you're doing.
Of course. Thank you so much. I hope this episode helped you guys out. If you guys are men or women contemplating parenthood, maybe you feel a little bit stuck. I mean, honestly, we're all in a different journey, but I really hope that Alex's story inspired you guys and helped you guys. Definitely go check out her blog and her website. I follow her on Instagram. She has a wonderful Instagram page, and her kids are so cute.
Thank you.
Of course, they're so cute. And with all that being said, I will talk to you guys in the next episode. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much for listening to A Catholic's Perspective with me, The Religious Hippie. Make sure to visit my official website at thereligioushippie.com, and while you're there, be sure to sign up for my newsletter to keep up to date with my latest news and offerings. You can also find me on virtually any social media site as The Religious Hippie. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Father Daniel Duplantis, a Catholic priest, martial artist, and host of the Karate Priest podcast. Have you ever wondered what the church teaches about different topics? Are you a martial arts enthusiast, or just someone who wants to learn more about martial arts? I'd like to invite you to join me and many guests on my podcast as we cover topics of faith, everyday living, and martial arts on the Karate Priest podcast.
'Tis the season to shine with H&M. Discover the holiday collection and find fashionable pieces for your wardrobe or for under the tree. Get inspired and dazzle with this year's glam. From tuxedo styles, bow detailed pieces, impressive prints, and more. From unforgettable looks to unforgettable gifts. With fashion finds to home decor, find it all at H&M. Treat your loved ones and yourself this season. Shop in-store or at hm.com.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Todd Fisher and Anthony Smith and is distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions stated in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure and visit the official website for Metacortex Publishing at metacortexpublishing.com or find us on social media for other unique content.